afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matthew Cheat. That song is called Canned Heat. And what we got here in the entire planet, the entire globe, is a can of heat. The analogy that the globe itself is somehow surrounded by a big, thick blanket can, an impenetrable wall for certain types of long-wave radiation, certain types of molecular transport, but in the end it functions as a blanket around our entire atmosphere. And I think you can see from my graphic here that that very slight glow that you see is actually thicker than the atmosphere really is. It turns out that it's very thin, that the actual ratio of the atmosphere to the circumference, to the diameter of the Earth is a tiny sliver. And it's that tiny sliver of atmosphere that has kept things alive forever. We have upset how that atmosphere functions by heating up the globe with a blanket effect caused by CO2. And this CO2 blanket effect has been scientifically researched, discussed, modeled mathematically as such way back into the 1800s, with historic research into atmospheric scientists have shown that this greenhouse effect has been known, published articles throughout the 1900s, the 1960s, the 1950s, television shows by the oil industry itself have actually been produced discussing the CO2 problem. Subsequently, the oil industry has been less than a fan of making massive changes to their own business model to protect us. But nonetheless, there has been science for many, many generations about that little thin layer of atmosphere and whether or not we are good stewards of it by allowing as much CO2 to be released. So what has happened within the hashtag abrupt climate change community is that a big, large group of scientists who years and years ago made a decision early in their academic careers to look into atmospheric science and just have that be their scientific thing that they do with their scientific brains. And that was a decision made for some of the people who are popular on the television 50 years, 60 years, 70 years ago, that they said, I like this particular type of science. Well, those type of people have existed from generations, have talked about atmospheric science, and they have known that there's been this CO2 problem. One of our great scientific communicators, although not an atmospheric scientist himself, Carl Sagan, met in Congress and said, we've got a big problem here. So every science fiction movie starts with a scientist being ignored. The climatological evidence has been overwhelmingly known. It just simply has been strategically not acted upon. And the strategic process of not acting upon change, the ability to dominate a debate with only your voice, these are parliamentary tactics and have to do with really the essence of education in antiquity. The essence of education in antiquity had to do with learning something called rhetoric. And the term has not changed. And then what we have is a stratified series of smart monkeys who've mastered verbal communication and verbal dexterity and have figured out how to take those kind of cues that worked good in your tribe and use them on a scale that allows the TV that you're watching right here to literally get into your mind, to get some degree of control over your mind, because some aspect of the choice that advertising wants you to make has gotten to you. This is the hashtag hypnosis of the masses. Hashtag hypnosis of the masses asks the question, just who's in charge of these memes that are being fed to us? And it turns out we know that. There's a gentleman by the name of Tom Secker, who's done quite a bit of work and discovered that there's a huge layer of the what would be commonly known as the deep state that's pretty much editing all of our communications that are mass mediatized and big movies and everything. Just they are controlling the message. So our culture is in fact an extension of whatever that is. Now, for those of you who think that this background is about UFOs, UFOs are a good place to learn a lot of things about information, misinformation, miscommunication, and the ability to control the narrative. And we learned quite a bit that, the way the Roswell system evolved and the lore of the Roswell system and the events that were confirmed in reality and all those things turns out to be a very similar system that has created a lot of the lore within our religious systems. Is that myth is created, and excuses made, and places filled out. But what Roswell has taught us is that if we look long enough into the cosmos, we discover that we're really alone, and that there are nothing nearby that's beaming us signals right now that looks like communication. And if we find some sort of weird pattern in the electronic noise out there, this is no way a confirmation of sophisticated communication. We are alone. As a result, the only thing that can rescue us is ourselves. It's our ability to solve our problems without having an external force, be it an alien force or the idea that there's an external God that will somehow swoop in and fix this situation. My religion, Chu Chi, is the religion of all gods. Turns out there's a lot of anthropological research about the concept of God, and that there's a lot of arguments about just what that is, even within existing religious sects. So the idea that this is some sort of immutable, single whole is really about how well you're programmed. It's not really an issue of whether or not there's a legitimate evidence of this thing going on. But it turns out there actually is a God. And that actual God that really exists is the stewards of this planet behind me. The stewardship of this planet and the life on it puts the people responsible for that stewardship on par with a god to all the other living things. Dolphins know who we are. Some of them play with us and talk to us, etc. They know that our species exists. Their relationship to us is one of confusion. They've seen great death and destruction for their herds from our fishing industries, etc. So they know that there's things to look out for from us. But really, what would we be to them with our superior technological condition? We would be a god to them, because there's simply no way that the whale can fight our harpoon. There's no way that the tiger can stop the bullet. We are gods to these animals. This godlike responsibility is so important when we start to realize that the true message, that if God actually had one, would be something along the lines of protect your environment. Something along the lines of worship the unbelievable interconnected beauty of nature and figure out how to work with that. We have an overshoot problem, and that the decisions about population control are going to be best left to other people who are going to discover population control through other mechanisms that may involve food scarcity. But population control, if it was implemented long enough ago, and we figured out just how many people could live in a globe without having devastating ecological impact that were just extinct so many species. If we could have avoided that, how many people could live on Earth in a current level of Western culture, etc. The numbers on that are probably frighteningly small in relation to how many people there are on Earth. So we've had an overshoot where there's a lot of people, and we are now facing one of the problems of a lot of people is that there's been an accumulation of a pollution that is made life itself on Earth, or at least an extensive long run of life itself on Earth, mathematically in question. The math of climate change science said that the run of a livable climate, the length of time we've got of that run right there, has gotten frighteningly short. I am the climate Buddha. I have spent many years talking about this, podcast created, been thinking about it for a long time. This isn't a passing thought or a hobby. Well, actually it is. It is my science hobby. I've never been a full-time science communicator, nor have I been a full-time climate scientist, but I have been a full-time communicator. And full-time communicators take on projects that they think are important. And I discovered the message of Guy McPherson back in 2015, 14, something around then. And I said, gee, Guy, you know, how long we got? He says, well, there's this thing called reinforcing feedback loops that change the math from linear change to exponential change. I go, oh, that makes sense. You know, that graphs sometimes, go straight like this, or sometimes they go like this, and then they suddenly start to accelerate out. So he says, we're going through that phase right now. This is 5 years ago. And I said, well, gee, Guy, climate moves really slow. He says, well, there's something called abrupt climate change science, where we searched for mechanisms in historic record to see just how long it takes to flip a climate from one state to another, or the length of time that climate change epoch takes, can be compressed into short periods of time. If the climate radically changes into something absolutely horrendous for a year, there's a probability that it would change back to normal for maybe a couple of years, 5 or 6, and then flip horrendously into another non-livable climate situation. These type of mathematical uncertainties make climate predictions just like predicting the weather. And everybody within the climate community is always working within an envelope of probability. And you hear terms of probability. So we have a math problem that the vast majority of the population of the planet does not understand. Math itself is not a good message on the media because people either don't understand it or don't want to hear it because it confuses them. But we have a big math problem that has to be unconfused. And that is that we've added a lot of heat energy that's not being dissipated. It's just staying in this little tiny atmosphere, and it's heating us up. And that heat is causing something else to occur that could heat us up. So this map right here, that's Italy. And we go up here. So the North Pole is right around there. And you see in my graphic right here that there's no water, and there's no ice. You can't see any ice. This is called the blue ocean event. This is one of the most important climatological pieces of science that you need to be aware of. It's one of the easiest to get in touch with, to simply look up, see what happens. So what's happened is that we have triggered a feedback loop within the Arctic. That the Arctic ice is going away from the heat, from the CO2. And since the Arctic's gone, there's more heat being absorbed into the ocean of the Arctic, which is heating the atmosphere, which is heating us out, which is also destabilizing frozen methane. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas, 30 times, maybe more potent than CO2. If you dump it out, it immediately affects the localized environment, changes the local climatological environment, changes it. Just, it happens because of the effect of the blanketing effect of the methane. Large quantities of this can be felt in the climatological local weather where they occur. So this is really a potent thing that if we release a whole bunch of it, and we could have very quick effects from this. These are some of the feedback loops that suddenly make the concept of abrupt climate change a possibility. The odds of these mechanisms going into place at a level that causes the temperature to go up very quickly and lots of energy is released, those odds are calculated by machines who figured the science out, the math of what I'm talking about. And they're saying that it's on the probability scale. But yet we're seeing evidence of this actually occurring. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen. And I will now shut off the stuff I got in the background. And yeah, it does look like I'm now screen sharing, so you can see my screen. And I'm going to go to the Climate Buddha on Facebook. This is my page. And we're going to look down on the screen. We see the introduction, and we see our meeting here. And then we see this gentleman. This gentleman, Dar Jamal, is a success story in the media reporting world. He is famous enough to get published on important websites, and his communication with Guy McPherson has a history where he was told, years ago from Guy that we had triggered feedback loops and that we were heading towards rapid increases in temperature over a short period of time. Well, this gentleman's work now completely agrees with Guy McPherson's timelines and is stating that we're in a very difficult and very dangerous phase of abrupt climate change. This is a podcast that I just recently produced where I talk about what I call the secret industrial complex, because the deep state and all these different terms, et cetera, there's an entrenched bunch of people who are in charge, and believe me, the people you're voting for aren't. And these one section of this community I'm calling the secret industrial complex, and the difficulties of giving this much power to so few people. But this is what I really wanted you all to see. And this is evidence of predicted methane releases and how they are spreading and how they function over time. This is October 26th of this year. And this is a satellite measurement. And the Climate Buddha happens to know the man who runs that satellite. I can call him up. His name is Yurganov, and he's a tremendous, intellectual, accomplished, published scientist who's running this particular satellite. So we know how good the data is because I know the guy who produces it. And what we're seeing here is a pinking of the top section of this area. Can you see this section right up in here, turning pink and then pink and then pink? This is a methane level release of some sort, isn't it? How much of a climatological scientist do you need to be to look at this and say, wow, that is definitely methane being released from someplace in the cold area of the planet? Where could that come from? Well, oil and gas drilling definitely does cause this, but the distribution of the methane is all around the Arctic Circle. This is the entire Arctic Circle, the upper section of this. So every element of the Arctic Circle, which is just encrusted with this frozen methane called clathrates, and that just looks to me, the Climate Buddha, who has been observing this type of scientific information for a long time, that looks like a release to me. So I said that, what could this information provide you with? And what it does is it provides you with an awareness of the length of time you have left to accomplish what you need to accomplish. Because the idea that the temperature rises predicted by the science that you're seeing in these graphs, etc., are going to make a habitable planet in question. You don't have to ask the people who are, I think, in Honduras right now, who are just about ready to catch a Cat 5 hurricane, if whether or not the environment's going to be difficult to live. And what it does is it wrecks all the growing cycle for that particular section of the planet that gets mowed down by a hurricane. So, if you mow down enough sections of the planet, you'll discover that you can't grow anything. We are talking about, growth cycles, etc. So this article right here, talks about what I term, and part of my religion, the Chukchi religion, is Chukchi NTHE, or near-term human extinction. And that's the religious aspects of realizing that not only yourself, but your friends and family and everything else that's alive is going to be severely impacted, like mass death. And, you know, when that happens, hope it's way beyond my time. But the Climate Buddha has a simultaneous message. And the simultaneous message is that, you know, that things are changing very, very rapidly, and that's going to directly affect the ability to grow quickly. And we could be in a situation where we need to make change very quickly. I have hashtag instant radical change. The idea that COVID, that we as a species were able to all walk around in masks voluntarily, indicates that we can change as a species very quickly. And instant radical change is totally possible. And the reason why instant radical change is extremely important, and the reason why I'm producing this podcast, this type of information, making it available to anybody who wants to, you know, communicate to me, is that we are facing a exponentiating energy increase from the industrial slowdown worldwide due to the virus. The industrial slowdown due to the virus, although has impacted some cultures more than others, has triggered in something called the aerosol masking effect. And the aerosol masking effect is a way for us to understand that pollution that we put in the atmosphere, some of it cools us and some of it heats us. Well, if you give enough time, the pollution that cools us floats out of the atmosphere. It's mostly solids. So when we slow down industrial production, we lose a cooling pollution. And it turns out that this number is somewhat contentious, but there's no doubt it works. And the slowdowns of the airline industry and the slowdowns of other industrial aspects are going to trigger this rapid increase in worldwide temperature, where the temperature of the Earth begins to go back to its normal, where the temperature of the Earth comes back to its thermodynamic temperature instead of its artificially created temperature from these aerosols that are in the atmosphere. So what's also happening right now, and if you can see on the map in front of the screen, is that the La Nina is happening. And this blue blotch right here indicates a cooling trend that's going on in the Pacific. And no, I don't understand, although I went to Massachusetts Maritime Academy, I do not understand all the mechanisms of the La Nina and the El Nino. But the La Nina is when it's cool, and the El Nino when it's hot. And I've seen this stripe right here being bright red, and that causes all sorts of heat imbalances up in here. And I remember living in Florida during a very large El Nino, and you could feel the changes in the atmosphere because it was thick with rich humidity, far beyond our normal humidity, because the atmosphere itself that it was coming from was hotter. Hotter atmosphere holds more moisture. So we have a temporary slowdown of our industrial systems that are causing the aerosol masking effect to kick in. And then we have a cooling trend globally that's going on. That means that when this cooling trend's gone, it's going to release the cap on that. And again, we can have a very quick spike in worldwide temperatures. And the question is what percentage of global warming energy being stored can change, you know, via an El Nino, right? Oceans, cryo, atmosphere, the research. See, the idea that there's lots of heat being created from the CO2 is that heat inside the envelope is going into the oceans for the most part. The number is a huge ratio of the amount of energy that's being created from the global warming problem in the Pacific, is it's going into the oceans. The very small percentage is going into the atmosphere. A relatively small percentage is going into the land. But what is our massive heat sink is the oceans. So when you start doing this with the oceans, when you start taking the oceans that are holding tremendous amounts of heat, and you can see the light areas where the oceans themselves, tremendous amounts of heat in the oceans. And we can see that the oceans are going to be cooling for a while, but we know they're going to be heating at some point in the future. You can see that this flip of energy during the El Ninos and the La Ninas, during accelerated phases of increased temperature, could be magnified and could affect the worldwide climate extremely quickly. And we could be faced with worldwide climatological disasters with stuff like this. And you could go to the morning headlines and look up Guy McPherson on YouTube and get some more information about La Nina and El Niños. And this is the relationship of all the energy that's coming in to global warming heat. It's going to the oceans by far, just a little bit in land, sea ice, ice sheets, and the rest is the atmosphere. This combination of glaciers, Arctic sea ice, Greenland ice sheets, Antarctic ice sheets, the numbers that you see right here, I believe, is a legitimately contentious issue because they actually represent major tipping point aspects of the climate that would change these percentages relatively quickly if the cryosphere suddenly melts. Here's some climate Buddha work. This is Sam Carano, and this is the UN's report on humanity's continued destruction of the planet. It turns out that there's just more and more evidence that humans actually are very aware of what they're doing to the planet. And this kind of deep contemplative spiritual awareness to sit there and say, yes, I know everything that I'm doing to the planet. I know it. I've got science that's backing it up. I got credible people, and they're all saying the same thing. I know that. I know that I'm wrecking the planet. I know that that's happening. And here's enough evidence where you say to yourself, there is so much evidence that beyond any recognizable shadow of a doubt that we are destroying the planet. Then what are we going to do about it? What is the net result of this effort? Is this going to be this great awareness, this mindfulness? Mindfulness, by the way, is a term that's used often in the Buddhist community, and I call myself a climate Buddha because I'm trained in a particular form of meditation, and I learned a bunch of different types of meditation, and I taught them. Mindfulness is a little bit of a contentious issue because some types of Buddhists call it one thing, another type of Buddhist calls it another. But in general, popular understanding of mindfulness is that it's an awareness. It's the ability to experience an omniscient awareness of all the things around you and accept that as it is without an argument going on or having your mind get too involved with that sensation and understanding. So we have an awareness of the planet's condition. This communication right here represents one of a small drop in the overall bucket of communication that's been dumped into the internet sphere that's available to all of humanity from credible resources showing that we are in deep climatological trouble and that the work of young Greta and the work of old climate Buddha and the generations between us and then some have to work together in a very profound and powerful way. I believe the mechanism that can cause this is something I call #distribute power. Is that we have to look at the exact systems that have actually put us into this place and ask, have concentrations of power fix this? Have the virtuous concentrations of power, have the intellectual concentrations of power, have the political concentrations of power, have the economic, have the banking, have the finance, have all these systems, the legal concentrations of power, have the secret industrial complex concentrations of power. These incredible concentrations, have they come together and said, we're going to need to solve this? And they have not. So we need systems change. We need to just look at these systems, where they came from, their history, discover, ask ourselves whether pre-existing conditions are just that important, and we'll discover that they're not, and that we can start all this from scratch, build a better society, build a better opportunity for us to thrive as humans in the limited time that we have. The climate Buddha is the ultimate optimist in knowing that we can go out together, struggling against this, working together, being responsible to the planet and to the lives of the planet, and be the stewards of our ecosystem and the moniker of the God that we really are to all living beings. My name is Matthew Chute. I'm the Climate Buddha. Thanks for joining my first